On a dark and stormy night, Jake Miller, a rugged farmer weighed down by mounting debts and the fading memories of his family's once thriving farm, stumbles upon a figure slumped near the edge of the woods. Battling against the torrential rain and biting wind, Jake discovers it's a young woman, unconscious and injured, with clothes that scream wealth and privilege, worlds apart from his own. This is Sophia Blackwood, an heiress on the run, fleeing the suffocating control of her father, a powerful businessman intent on using her as a pawn in an arranged marriage to cement a corporate merger. Without hesitation, Jake carries her to his modest farmhouse, unaware that this chance encounter will change the course of both their lives forever. As the storm outside subsides, a different kind of storm brews inside. Jake, a man of integrity and quiet strength, struggles to understand the mysterious woman he has taken in, while Sophia awakens in a world far removed from her own. Used to the glitz of high society and the weight of endless expectations, she is struck by the simplicity of Jake's life. A life of hard work, unflinching honesty, and unspoken dreams. Yet, even as Sophia begins to find solace in the rhythms of farm life, the shadow of her powerful father looms large. Richard Blackwood isn't just a protective father. He's a man who won't tolerate defiance, and he's dispatched an investigator to track her down. For Sophia, freedom comes at a high price, and she knows her father will stop at nothing to drag her back to his world, where she's expected to sacrifice her happiness for the family's ambitions. Meanwhile, Jake's life is unraveling in its own way. His farm, a legacy passed down through 3 generations, is on the brink of collapse. The debts are piling up, and the idea of selling off the land, a piece of his heart, feels like a betrayal of everything his family worked for. Yet, despite his own struggles, Jake finds himself drawn to Sophia, not just for her beauty or her vulnerability, but for her spirit. A spirit that refuses to be crushed, even in the face of immense pressure. Against his better judgment, Jake decides to protect her, knowing full well that harboring her could bring trouble he can't afford. As days turn into weeks, their connection deepens. Sophia begins to learn the value of hard work, the peace that comes with tending to animals, and the fulfillment of working with her hands. Things money could never buy. And Jake, in turn, is inspired by Sophia's courage, her determination to reclaim her life, and her refusal to bow to her father's demands. Together, they begin to see the possibility of a future that defies the odds. A future where they could rebuild not just the farm, but their own broken lives. But this fragile hope is threatened when Richard Blackwood escalates his search. The arrival of his private investigator brings fear to the farm, and the stakes rise as Sophia's location becomes increasingly vulnerable. Jake is faced with impossible choices: to hand her over and take the reward that could save his farm, or to stand by her, risking everything he has left. When Richard Blackwood himself arrives at Jake's doorstep, flanked by his lawyers and fueled by righteous anger, the tension reaches its boiling point. Sophia, no longer the frightened heiress who stumbled into Jake's life, stands her ground, refusing to be manipulated into a life she doesn't want. Jake, ever the protector, refuses to let her face this battle alone. Together, they challenge Richard's authority, fighting for Sophia's right to choose her own path and for the life they've begun to build on the farm. It's a showdown of wills, and though Richard's power looms large, Sophia and Jake's determination proves to be a force of its own. As the dust settles, a legal settlement frees Sophia from her father's grasp, but at a cost. She forfeits her inheritance and walks away from the life of luxury she once knew. Yet, in doing so, she gains something far more valuable: the freedom to live life on her terms. Jake, too, finds renewed purpose. With Sophia by his side, he begins to see a way forward for the farm, and together they rebuild not just the land, but their dreams. In the weeks that follow, the small town begins to embrace Sophia as one of their own. No longer the mysterious runaway heiress, she becomes a part of the community, working side by side with Jake to create a new life. Their jam business, a revival of Jake's family tradition, starts to gain attention, And for the first time in years, the farm feels alive again. Sophia, who once felt lost in the shadows of corporate boardrooms, discovers the joy of belonging, of being seen and valued for who she truly is. And though life on the farm is far from easy, every challenge they face together feels like a victory. In Jake, Sophia finds a partner who values her strength and independence. And in Sophia, Jake finds someone who believes in him and the life they're building. Their bond, forged in the storm and tempered by the trials they've endured, becomes unbreakable. As they stand together on the porch of their farmhouse, watching the sun set over the rolling fields, they know they've found something priceless. Not just love, but a sense of purpose, a home, and a future they can truly call their own. Sophia, the woman who had stumbled into Jake's life during the storm, finally revealed her truth one evening as they sat in the soft glow of the farmhouse kitchen. Her voice wavered, but her resolve was clear. She was Sophia Blackwood, heiress to one of the largest corporate empires in the country. Her father, Richard Blackwood, was a man who wielded power like a weapon, and her arranged engagement to Andrew Green wasn't just a family affair. It was a business merger. "I couldn't do it, Jake," she whispered, her eyes glistening. "I couldn't let them take away the last shred of my independence. So, I ran." Jake's heart sank under the weight of her confession. He'd been struggling to keep his farm alive, every month drowning a little deeper in debt. And now, sitting across from him was the solution to all his problems, an heiress with a hefty reward attached to her name. If he turned her in, he could pay off the debts, save the farm, and rebuild everything his family had worked so hard for. But as he looked at Sophia, the desperation and fear etched on her face. He knew the cost of that decision wasn't just financial. Turning her in meant betraying the trust she'd placed in him. It meant choosing money over doing what he knew in his gut was right. Jake leaned back, his mind a storm of doubt, but one thing became clear. He couldn't betray her. Not like this. The choice, however, came at a price. Word of Sophia's disappearance spread fast, and Richard Blackwood wasn't a man to leave loose ends. He hired Michael Harper, a relentless private investigator who descended on the countryside like a hawk circling its prey. Harper's presence was felt everywhere. His polished shoes kicking up dust on dirt roads, his sharp eyes scanning every farm and field, and his questions weaving through local ears like poison. The people in the small, close-knit community began whispering about the mysterious heiress hiding in plain sight. The first time Harper arrived at Jake's farm, Jake met him at the porch. His broad shoulders squared and his hands clenched into fists behind his back. "I'm looking for Sophia Blackwood," Harper said, his voice smooth but laced with a threat. "Rumor has it she's been seen in these parts." Jake's heart pounded, but he kept his face calm, his words even. "Haven't seen anyone by that name. Just me and my animals out here." Harper's gaze lingered too long, and for a moment, Jake thought he might push his way inside. But Harper tipped his hat with a sly smile. "I'll be back," he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't over. Tensions only escalated as Harper began questioning locals, stopping by Maggie's and Ben's properties, and making his presence impossible to ignore. But in those moments of rising danger, Jake and Sophia discovered something incredible. Their community. Maggie, the no-nonsense neighbor who had known Jake since he was a boy, stood firm. "You need to hide her? I've got a cellar and no shortage of excuses for why strangers are nosing around." Ben, Jake's oldest friend and the town mechanic, became a quiet but steadfast ally, subtly redirecting Harper's questions whenever the investigator came sniffing around. Even the locals, some of whom barely knew Jake or Sophia, seemed to close ranks around them, refusing to entertain Harper's inquiries and offering quiet reassurances when they could. Despite their support, the pressure mounted. Sophia's heart raced whenever a car pulled into the drive, and Jake found himself waking up in the middle of the night, haunted by the possibility of losing everything. His farm, his freedom, and now, Sophia. But through it all, the bond between them only deepened. "Jake, once resigned to a life of solitude and struggle, found purpose in protecting Sophia, while she began to see that the life she thought she was running from was nothing compared to the warmth and strength she'd found in this simple farmhouse and the man who refused to let her down. Together, they braced themselves for what felt like an inevitable storm, their lives now bound by a choice that could either save or destroy them both. The peace of the farm was shattered one evening by the crunch of tires on gravel. Jake's heart dropped as he stepped out onto the porch and saw the sleek black car. He didn't need to ask who it was. The way it gleamed in the fading sunlight, flanked by an equally polished SUV, told him everything. Richard Blackwood had arrived, and he wasn't alone. From the car stepped a man whose very presence seemed to chill the warm country air. Beside him was Andrew Green, looking sharp, smug, and ready for confrontation. "Where is she?" Richard demanded, his voice cold as steel. He barely looked at Jake, his focus entirely on the house behind him. "Sophia, come out now. This has gone far enough." Jake planted his feet firmly on the porch. "She's not going anywhere unless she wants to," he said, his tone low but unyielding. Richard's piercing gaze finally met Jake's, a look that could have cowed most men, but Jake didn't flinch. He wasn't just defending Sophia, he was defending the farm, his principles, and the life he'd built here. Sophia stepped out of the house then, her chin lifted and her voice steady. "Father, I'm not going back. I've made my decision." For a moment, the air seemed to still. Richard blinked, as though the very idea of someone defying him was incomprehensible. Andrew stepped forward, his tone condescending. "Sophia, don't be ridiculous. This is your future you're throwing away. Think about what this means for the family, for the business." "I am thinking about my future," Sophia shot back. "And for once, it's on my terms. I won't be part of a merger disguised as a marriage. I won't be controlled anymore." Her voice grew stronger with every word, the weight of years of silence finally lifting. Richard's expression darkened. "You're being reckless, Sophia. This life." He gestured dismissively at the farm. "It's beneath you. Do you honestly believe this man," he spat the word, glaring at Jake, "can provide you with anything remotely close to what you had?" Sophia didn't hesitate. "Yes, because what I have here is peace, honesty, and a chance to be myself. Something you've never given me." The words landed like a blow. For the first time, Richard faltered, his anger flickering into something almost like disbelief. But it didn't last long. His face hardened again, and his voice turned venomous. "You'll regret this, Sophia. I'll make sure of it. And as for you," he pointed at Jake, "I'll ruin you. I'll see this farm buried in lawsuits and debts so deep you'll never climb out." Jake's fists clenched at his sides, but he stayed calm. "Do what you need to, Mr. Blackwood. But you're not forcing her to leave." Richard stormed back to his car, barking orders to Andrew and his driver. "We'll see how long this fantasy lasts," he said before slamming the door. The cars roared off, leaving a tense silence in their wake. Inside the farmhouse, the weight of Richard's threats hung heavily in the air. Jake paced the floor, his mind racing. "He's not bluffing," he said. "He's got the money and power to make life hell for both of us." Sophia placed a hand on his arm. "Then we fight back. I won't let him destroy you or this farm because of me." Her voice was steady, her resolve unshakable. For the first time, Jake saw not just the frightened woman he'd taken in, but someone who was ready to stand and face the storm. The next day, they met with Sam Willis, the town's semi-retired attorney. Sam listened carefully, his sharp eyes assessing the situation as Sophia laid everything out. Her father's control, the threats, and her desire for independence. "You've got a case," Sam said, leaning back in his chair. "Sophia, you're an adult. Legally, your father can't force you to return or marry anyone. And if you sign a formal declaration of independence, we can nullify any claim he might make about you being under duress." Sophia nodded. "And Jake? Can he come after him?" Sam frowned. "There's a risk. Blackwood could try to frame it as harboring a runaway or interfering with family matters. But if we get ahead of it, file documents asserting that you stayed here willingly and without coercion, it'll weaken his case. Jake looked at Sophia, then at Sam. What about her inheritance? He could use that as leverage. Sophia took a deep breath. I'm prepared to give it up. The money, the shares in the company, none of it matters if it means being trapped. I'd rather have nothing and be free than live under his thumb. The room fell silent. Jake reached out, taking her hand. You don't have to give up everything for me, he said softly. I'm not doing it for you, she replied, her voice firm. I'm doing it for me. This is my choice. The following days were a whirlwind of paperwork and preparation. Sophia signed the declaration, officially stating her independence and renouncing any immediate claims to her family's wealth. Jake signed affidavits affirming her freedom and his innocence. Sam filed the documents with the county courthouse, setting the stage for a legal defense if Richard chose to escalate. For Sophia, it was a moment of profound growth. She had always lived in the shadow of her father's power, letting his decisions dictate her life. But now, she stood on her own 2 feet, willing to sacrifice everything she'd once thought was essential to claim her freedom. For Jake, it was a reminder of why he'd fought so hard to protect her. Her courage inspired him, reigniting his own determination to save the farm and build a future worth fighting for. Together, they braced themselves for whatever came next, knowing they were stronger for having faced the worst and stood their ground. The small conference room at the Redwood Inn was a far cry from the grand boardroom Sophia had grown up in, but the tension in the air was just as thick. Sitting across from her father, Richard Blackwood, Sophia felt a swirl of emotions: anxiety, defiance, and a faint pang of sadness. This was the man who had controlled every aspect of her life, and now she was about to confront him in a battle for her freedom. Richard's sharp gaze was unwavering, his tailored suit and commanding presence a stark contrast to the modest surroundings. Sophia, he began, his voice calm but with an edge of steel, let's end this nonsense. You belong in Seattle, where your life has structure and purpose. Not here on some backwater farm. Sophia's hands tightened into fists under the table, but her voice remained steady. Structure and purpose, or control and obligation, she countered. This is my life, Father. I won't let you dictate it anymore. Richard leaned back, an air of calculated composure about him. I'm offering you a chance to fix this. Come back to Seattle. Marry Andrew. Your inheritance will remain intact, and this embarrassment will quietly disappear. Andrew Green, seated to Richard's right, spoke up, his tone insistent. Sophia, this isn't just about you. Families depend on this merger. You can't walk away from your responsibilities. Sophia turned to him, her expression sharp. Responsibilities? You mean being a pawn in a business deal? That's not love, Andrew. That's a transaction. And I refuse to sacrifice my happiness for a contract. Richard's facade cracked for a moment, his voice rising. You'd throw away everything. Your inheritance, your place in this family. For what? A struggling farm and a man you've known for weeks. Sophia's jaw clenched, but she didn't waver. Yes, because what I've found here is worth more than all the money and prestige you've ever dangled in front of me. For the first time, I feel free, and I won't give that up. Not for you, not for anyone. Sam Willis, seated beside Sophia, finally interjected, his calm professionalism cutting through the rising tension. Mr. Blackwood, let's keep this civil. We're here to reach an agreement, not to rehash family drama. Sophia has made her position clear. She's filed a legal declaration affirming her independence. Any further attempts to claim she's under duress will be met with a formal challenge in court. Richard's glare shifted to Sam, but the older man remained unfazed. This is the point where you decide, Mr. Blackwood. Do you want to drag this into the public eye, with all the scrutiny that entails, or will you respect your daughter's wishes and settle this matter amicably? For a long moment, the room was silent. Sophia's heart pounded as she waited for her father's response. Finally, Richard sighed. his shoulders slumping slightly as the weight of defeat settled over him. "Very well," he said, his tone clipped. "If this is truly what you want, Sophia, I won't fight it. I'll sign the agreement and drop all claims." Relief washed over Sophia, but it was bittersweet. She had won her freedom, but at the cost of her relationship with her father, at least for now. Anna Perez, Richard's legal associate, slid the paperwork across the table. Sophia signed first, her hand steady, though her chest felt heavy with the finality of it. Richard followed, his signature sharp and precise, as though he were slashing the paper. When it was done, Richard stood abruptly, his voice low and cold. "I hope you don't regret this, Sophia, because once you walk out of here, you're on your own." Sophia met his gaze, her own unwavering. "I'd rather be on my own than under your control." Without another word, Richard and Andrew left the room, their departure as tense as their arrival. Sophia remained seated for a moment, her shoulders slumping as the adrenaline drained from her body. Sam placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You did well. That took courage." Jake, who had been waiting outside the room, rushed in the moment the door opened. Seeing the weariness in Sophia's eyes, he wrapped her in a protective embrace. "It's over," he murmured. "You're free." Sophia nodded, though tears prickled at the corners of her eyes. "It's over," she repeated, her voice soft, but the cost of that freedom weighed heavily on her heart. As they left the inn and stepped into the crisp evening air, Sophia looked up at Jake, drawing strength from his presence. She had severed ties with her father and walked away from her inheritance, but she had gained something far more valuable, a life of her own, built on her terms, with the man who had stood by her through it all. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, it was hers to choose. The legal storm had finally passed, leaving a calm but determined resolve in its wake. With the weight of lawsuits, investigators, and family pressures behind them, Sophia and Jake turned their focus to the future, a future they could now shape together. The farm, once a symbol of struggle and uncertainty, began to feel like fertile ground for renewal. Sophia threw herself into the work, finding surprising joy in the simplicity of farm life. Whether it was kneading dough for bread, carefully labeling jars of jam, or feeding the playful lamb that had become her shadow, every task felt like a piece of a new identity she was building for herself. This wasn't the life she had envisioned growing up in the glass towers of Seattle, but it was real. It was hers. Jake, too, felt a shift within him. Where once he had seen only debts and decay, he now saw potential. Together, they planted new seeds, both literal and metaphorical, repairing fences, expanding the garden, and even discussing plans to turn the small jam business into a local staple. The support from the community had bolstered his confidence, and with Sophia by his side, the farm felt alive again. The townspeople, once wary of Sophia as the enigmatic city girl, began to embrace her as one of their own. At the church potluck, Maggie had practically dragged her to the center of the hall, announcing, "This one's been working harder than most of us. And have you tried her jam? It's a masterpiece." Sophia's cheeks flushed with warmth as the crowd erupted in applause. Nervous at first, she stood to address them. "Thank you all for welcoming me," she said, her voice trembling but sincere. "When I came here, I was running from a life that didn't feel like my own. But now, thanks to Jake, Maggie, Ben, and all of you, I found something better than I ever could have imagined. Belonging." The applause was deafening. Neighbors approached her throughout the evening, offering encouragement, ideas for expanding the jam business, and even offers to help with the next harvest. Jake watched her with quiet pride, marveling at how seamlessly she had woven herself into the fabric of their small-town life. As the weeks passed, life settled into a steady rhythm. Early mornings were spent tending to the animals and crops, afternoons making deliveries to local shops or perfecting jam recipes, and evenings filled with laughter and quiet moments on the porch. Sophia found herself thriving in the slow, intentional pace of the farm, and Jake rediscovered the hope he thought he'd lost. One golden evening, As they stood by the orchard admiring the apples ripening on the trees, Sophia looked at Jake, her face lit by the setting sun. "I never thought I'd find happiness in a place like this," she said softly, "but I wouldn't trade it for anything." Jake smiled, his eyes warm. "Me neither," he replied. "You've changed everything here, Sophia. Not just for the farm, but for me." As they walked back to the farmhouse, hand in hand, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, Sophia knew that this was just the beginning. They had faced the storm together, and now, as they rebuilt piece by piece, they were creating something beautiful, something worth fighting for. In every repaired fence, every jar of jam, and every shared laugh, they were building a life filled with purpose, love, and the simple joys of belonging. As twilight settled over the farm, casting golden hues across the fields, Jake and Sophia found themselves leaning against the porch railing, gazing out at the land they had fought so hard to preserve. The air was quiet, save for the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, a calm that mirrored the peace they now felt. Sophia turned to Jake, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "You risked everything for me, Jake," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "This farm, your freedom, you didn't have to, but you did." Jake reached for her hand, his grip warm and steady. "You've given me just as much, Sophia," he replied, his voice low but full of conviction. "Before you came here, I'd almost given up. You reminded me what it means to fight for something worth saving." Their hands lingered together as the moment stretched, the weight of their shared trials settling into a quiet, unspoken bond. Sophia's gaze softened. "I want to build something with you, Jake," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Not just a farm, but a life, a real home." Jake smiled, his lips curving with both tenderness and determination. "Then let's start with that fence by the creek," he said with a hint of a grin. No better way to build a dream than one post at a time. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the trees, they worked side by side, hammering nails and tying wire, their movements synchronized as if they'd been doing this together for years. Each post they secured felt symbolic, a testament to the resilience they had discovered in themselves and each other. Sophia paused at one point, wiping her brow and looking over at Jake. "It's not just a fence," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's a promise." Jake chuckled, nodding in agreement. "One we're keeping, no matter what." Months later, the promise bore fruit. The farm was alive with new beginnings. Sturdy livestock grazing in the fields, rows of crops thriving under the summer sun, and jars of jam flying off the shelves in local markets. The farmhouse, once a place of isolation and struggle, now felt like a beacon of warmth and life. On an early autumn evening, Jake and Sophia stood on the porch, their fingers entwined as they looked out at the land they had saved together. The golden glow of the setting sun bathed the fields, and the soft hum of crickets filled the air. The scene was a testament to their journey, a blend of hard work, love, and unwavering determination. Sophia leaned her head against Jake's shoulder, her voice soft but steady. "We did it," she said, her tone laced with both wonder and pride. Jake kissed the top of her head, his gaze never leaving the horizon. "We're just getting started." As they stepped off the porch, heading hand in hand toward the barn to check on the animals one last time before nightfall, their laughter carried on the breeze, blending with the sounds of the thriving farm. The camera slowly pulled back, capturing the couple as they disappeared into the soft glow of the barn lights, their bond stronger than ever, their future as bright as the fields around them. A voiceover gently closed the story. Jake and Sophia proved that love and resilience could overcome even the most powerful obstacles. Together, they found not just a home but a sense of belonging, a place where dreams could grow. What did you think of their journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. With the scene fading to black, the final call to action encouraged viewers to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories of love, courage, and triumph, leaving them inspired and hopeful as the credits rolled.